Hello and welcome to the first in our series of podcasts. This one is with a visiting grower. We're very delighted and privileged to have a visitor from South Africa. Please welcome Evan Milborrow.
Thank you, Rob, for having me. You're obviously very excited and grateful to be here, spend some time looking at the plants and getting to know you a little bit better. And yeah, thank you for the invite to join you on the podcast today.
Well, really our pleasure. And I understand you grow plants in South Africa. So perhaps you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into Nepenthes.
Sure. I've always been interested in growing various things. And I think like most of us plant enthusiasts, you kind of go through phases of trying different things that get you excited. And the Nepenthes are just what stuck for me. I got my first plants probably about 20 years ago. Not a lot of information then about what to do and what not to do. So I think I had them for about a year before promptly killing them, as I'm sure we all have experience with as well. And then a couple of years after that, I got a few, and the bug really bit. And from there, it's just kind of exploded, and I added to the collection and started hybridizing my own a little bit, growing from seeds. Yeah, it's been a really fun adventure.
Well, I pardon the pun on the bud biting bit, but yes, you echo, I think, many people's experience when they first start growing carnivorous plants in general. Most of us killed our first Venus flytrap, and many people threw them away, didn't they? And then other people thought, why did that die? And they try again. Then they try with other carnivorous plants, such as yeah.
And I think for me, a lot of the challenge and joy of growing them is, I was mentioning to you the other day, it's not just having a beautiful plant, but it's the process of figuring out what they need, and checking on them and trying different things, and then getting it right. And that's a really rewarding feeling.
Yeah. So where you're growing them in South Africa, can you tell us a little bit more about the environment? Is it that altitude and what's the climate like there?
Sure. So I started growing just on our veranda, so patio, outside area where my parents live is a pretty good climate. Probably a little bit dry in the winter because we have summer rainfall. But summer is great for them. Good humidity, temperatures aren't too high, and yeah, I had them in a protected spot. They did very well. Um, Started with Sanguinea and Copelandii, which was still quite special to me as, kind of nostalgic reasons. And then as the collection grew, they started taking over the veranda and I had to make other plans. So eventually shipped it into a shade house. Yeah, as I said, pretty good climates as long as you have some good misting. Most of the intermediates and not too tricky highlanders do well. I think the biggest problem is just wind and drying out. So added a bit of plastic around the sides, and then as you start growing more difficult things, then you have to adapt and improvise and create new growth spaces. But that's how it really started, and a lot of my collection today is still in the shake house.
Tremendous. Yes, I'm sure at some point your family must have noticed that something strange was going on in the garden. Did these plants they were just grown on the veranda? Did you start growing some of them indoors as well? And how did you adapt the condition?
Yeah, so I think I have a lot of unusual interests. I think my family realized something strange was going on long before the Nepenthes arrived. Um, I, as I said, I think the bulk of my plants are in an outdoor sort of semi-enclosed shade house with some plastic for extra protection. As I got into some of the more difficult ones, which required more stable conditions or cooler conditions, more sort of stable, predictable humidity, I started growing some things indoors, at least, at a smaller seedling stage. They can't handle quite the same fluctuations a more robust adult plant can handle. I currently, the setup is a sort of a large outside tunnel, shade house, and then I have some indoor sort of cabinets, glass tank type structures that I built myself, and then a large grow tent as well. So I have a little bit of experience with all sorts of different things at this point.
So in South Africa, there's not many vendors of carnivorous plants. So where do you manage to obtain your plants from?
Yeah, so it's been a fun journey. When I first started, there was almost nowhere to obtain plants, and you really took what you could get. I think these days, wherever you are in South Africa, it's a lot more accessible, and there's a lot more options in terms of being able to pick what you want to grow, and obviously, good information on how to do it correctly. in the beginning, I really connected with a collectant country who'd been doing a little bit longer than me. And yeah, got a lot of help from him just sourcing material. And then eventually I ran out of plants that were available in the country and I had to just start importing. I figured out the process, also just talking to various growers. We do group orders together and bring things in. A lot of your plants and then some other plants mostly through Europe. It's just kind of the easiest route for us being where we are in the world. And now there's a number of suppliers, so it's a lot easier. There's a number of nurseries that are stocking and bringing plants themselves, and also enough. There's sort of a critical mass of growers that people are propagating and hybridizing themselves, and some interesting things coming out of just greenhouses in South Africa.
Interesting. I know when I first started growing carnivorous plants myself, there were hardly any sources anywhere in the world for them, and the increase in popularity has been really remarkable with the advent of social media in particular. So, in your facility, do you use misting systems? Because we're going to cover in a series of podcasts on a podcast with a series of videos, um, all the cultivation aspects of carnivorous plants and all the different requirements of the different types of, particularly Nepenthes. Um, but often humidity is a major difficulty, especially in dry climate. So you're using high pressure fog, are you, or low pressure fog?
For sure. So I think anyone who's grown the Nepenthes for a while and could kind of knows there's a couple of aspects that need to be balanced. And sometimes they work together and sometimes they're in opposition to each other. So it's been a journey trying to figure out, partly through other growers and partly through experimentation, how to sort of balance your heat and your moisture levels and your humidity and your airflow and your life levels and all of those things. And there's definitely been a process, sort of iterations of adding shade cloth and removing things and trying various misting systems. I use a lot of, having started quite young, and built onto the systems as I've gone along and had the funds to do it. I often the choices have been informed by what I had resource wise at the time. So, ideally, what I would do and probably what I currently have and the plans for the future are not all exactly the same. I actually use the same system for irrigation and misting. I live in a climate where winter can be a little bit problematic, but summer the humidity is good. So my a lot of my misting is more for cooling than just to bump humidity. And it's a bit difficult, I think if you live in a dry climate, evaporative cooling is actually a lot more effective. So yeah, that's why I say there's this interesting balance of you win in some ways and you lose in others. But yeah, I have some overhead misting systems. I wouldn't say they're large particles. It's sort of probably, but it's not a misting either. It's sort of somewhere in between. So I can use it for dual purposes. And then if I use it for short periods of time, I can just cool the greenhouse down, or the humidity is a little bit low, I can raise that up. And then if I need to, I just leave it on for longer and I get everything a really good soak.
Yeah.
And that's how I water it.
So you water from above.
I do, yeah.
Through the same system you're using for
sure.
humidification.
Yeah. So I also use cocoa as my main media.
Yes, that is your next question.
Yeah.
What medias you have?
So, and a lot of that is, as you get more plants, just it's cost effective and it's what's available. And I think with Nepenthes, and we were also talking about it yesterday, the way they grow naturally is you want that sort of flushing. I think a lot of people have strong opinions about what media they use, but a lot of people are very successful with a lot of different types of media. And I think as long as you have your moisture levels right and you don't let anything build up, so both when you use new media, you want it to be well rinsed, and then once you're growing in it, you top watering and you flushing all the time. And they seem pretty easy to grow media wise, not too picky about what you put in it.
Yes, as you said, there's a very wide range of media available that some people favor this, some people favor that. As you've seen here at Borneo Exotics, we use cocoa products exclusively because it's obtainable in Sri Lanka for sure. Anything else that we think we might want to use has to be imported, which is very problematic sometimes. So we've had to make do with coconut fiber. It's not, in my opinion, always the ideal, but it works well with some plants. But when you buy it, does it come in the form of compressed blocks or is it loose?
So I buy it as your compressed blocks, bales, ideally, even in South Africa, supply is sometimes a little bit problematic in terms of getting the exact sort of quality or coarseness you want. So I tend to buy a large number of blocks at a time and they go live in the garage. And then you pull them out as you need them, hydrate them, break them apart. I like to let them soak quite a lot, just to make sure if there's anything in there, you can kind of flush it before you start.
Yes.
Yeah, and for the most part, it works great for me. There's definitely certain species that grow on slightly different soil, or they have sort of slightly different maybe pH requirements or minerals in the media, and it's definitely a newer thing. I've seen a lot of other growers are starting to play with and have a lot of success with, and I've started experimenting a little bit. But I think just in terms of simplicity and cost effectiveness, especially if you've got a fairly large number of plies, cocoa does the trick.
Yeah. Just, did you hear that? So, we found that the cocoa peat you buy here, which is actually compressed into blocks for export. In fact, maybe the stuff you're using comes from Sri Lanka. It's very heavily contaminated, if you want that's the right word, with salts. Yeah. Partly because they fertilize the coconut trees with salts that the coconut trees absorb, and partly because they often dry the coconut fiber on a beach somewhere, literally with sea spray. So I think it's, in our opinion, very important to soak it down until the EC is barely measurable, and they vary a lot from batch to batch.
Yeah, so a lot of people use various meters to measure the particles in the water as they rinse their cocoa and conductivity and all of that. I think I've been doing this a while and it's a bit too much effort. You kind of get a feel, when it's rinsed well enough. You top watering, you
Probably
probably
just taste it.
yeah, I've done that a couple times. And when you're flushing it well, it's not too much of an issue for me. I've heard some horror stories. I've heard of sometimes in the manufacturing process things getting rinsed with salty water. Um, but I think as long as you give it a good rinse beforehand and you soak it for a while and give it a taste if you want to,
Yes.
you can. Yeah, I haven't had any horror story or any problems with it, and I've been growing in it for between 15 and 20 years. So
Lasts a long time. When we first started telling people they were growing cocoa peat, it was in the early days of the internet, really, social media, and there were forums. And I was hammered by people who said, "Oh, you can't possibly be growing them. It's just not possible. They don't grow properly." Well, actually, there are ways of doing it. We'll cover that actually in cultivation videos separately.
I've also just been very impressed with how robust and tough Nepenthes are as plants. I think in the beginning, I really cuddled them, and
Yes.
especially when it's hard to source material, you treasure it. And I think as I've grown things for longer, and there's periods where I've been away, when I was studying as a student, they, for the most part, especially once they're a larger size, they're pretty tough. And when it comes to fertilizing or the media you use, or even periods where the humidity was a bit low and they get a little bit ugly and the pitches die off, they bounce back really well. So there's some plants that are a bit more valuable or they're a bit more picky and you really want to watch them. But I think a lot of the intermediates or the easier highland plants, the hybrids that are coming out, um, yeah, they're really the effort to reward ratio is really good.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. This might sound a bit weird, but when you're onto your plants, now you've been growing 15 to 20 years, do you feel that the plants are happy? You know what I mean? If I walk into a greenhouse, I can feel straight away whether the plants are happy. They sort of talk to me. I do
Yeah.
that at all.
So I mentioned there've been periods where, because when I started, I was still at school. I was in high school, sort of beginning of high school, and then I went to university, and I moved cities, and there was definitely periods where I couldn't be around the plants, and it doesn't matter how great your growth space is if you leave things for a couple months. There's always issues if you don't have eyes on them yourself. And what I found really interesting is there's the really rewarding side where you're away and you come back and suddenly there's a whole lot of new pictures or there's new growth and it's really exciting to look forward to that. But also just I realized having family, sticking their head in the greenhouse on my behalf, how when you've grown things for a long time and you're really interested and you're passionate about them, you develop that eye. You can tell very quickly when a plant is happy or there's something that's not quite right. Um, yeah, and they do sort of talk to you in a way.
Yeah. Everything from the pitch to leaf ratio to the color of the leaf. If it's too dark, if it's too light, to let you know that regular fertilizer needs adjusting. Yeah, so get used to that.
And sometimes it's, the plant can look good, but it's just not holding its pitches as long.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, coloration is a good one. How quickly it's putting out leaves. Um, yeah, I think it's hard to describe to someone else or a new grower. So a lot of it just comes through time, looking at them and seeing how they respond differently to different stimuli or treatments. But you definitely get a feel for it, and it's nice when you can walk in and be like, oh, that one needs to be shifted slightly, or maybe it needs a bit. Oh, oops, I haven't fertilized it in a little too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you give us an example, perhaps, of a plant which has been particularly difficult, unexpectedly difficult? Or what is the most problematic Nepenthes you grow in terms of difficulty?
Well, I've been doing this a while, so I've killed a lot of plants over the years, and it's hard to pick one of those because you don't necessarily know what went wrong when you're starting out, and you lose things along the way. In terms of plants that just I think it maybe been a struggle to keep happy, um, you're probably not gonna like this, but I have a Rob Cantley that I got early, and it doesn't really do a huge amount for me, and I don't know why.
No, you're not the first person to say that, actually, though they can be quite difficult.
Yeah, so
If you're like the namesake, I suppose.
but yeah, I mean, if it's happy in that it doesn't look sick, and it doesn't it's looks like a healthy plant. It's just like it doesn't look like these. Well, no, not quite. But I was hoping I'd be there by now, but it's just a slow one for me. It's there, and the Penthes are funny like that. I have a lot of plants that I've bought, and then I've also got quite a lot of plants that are, cross things and growing from seed. And sometimes you just end up with a plant and you give it a year or two and you've got almost a mature specimen. You can have a plant that just sits there for 5, 6 years and does nothing. And I don't know why.
Yes.
But it's kind of,
It's very difficult to know what's going on at the root level in terms of the root issue, which you can't see unless you actually bare root the plant. So there's when it isn't. I think it's
but when you've only got one of something and it's,
you don't dare to.
yeah, you don't really want to keep digging it up. So as I said, a lot of my joy in the process is trying to figure these things out and experimenting.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise I feel like most of the plants have been, once you learn what you can do with your conditions. My conditions, the indoor growing is different, but the outdoor growing, which was all I did for a long time, is fairly low tech, and you learn what you can and can't grow in the space. And I think, yeah, I think like most growers, we always have our eye on something, so you're always kind of testing those boundaries. But I think most things that haven't done well for me was because I was trying to grow something outside of where it should have been growing, essentially.
Well, on that berry subject, actually, do you grow any ultra highlanders? For example, about Belosa?
Yeah, so I don't have a Velosa. It's one that I just by choice decided not to spend the money on until I felt I had an appropriate grow space. Um, yeah, it's kind of always sitting there, tempting me. It's definitely one I will get. I've done Macrophylla, which arguably is from these. Oh, quite similar. I've got Diabolica, which grows really well. Yeah, so in the inside grow space, which is probably in the last 3, 4 years, I've started dabbling in more of the trippy ones. Yeah, Dietus and some of the.
So in the inside grow space, how are you actually cooling? Are you using Calcium cooler or something?
No, so the inside grow space is actually in Cape Town, which is a little bit cooler. The that I live in is cool. And then what I've essentially done is I have a large sort of self-created. It's essentially a crate with ultrasonic foggers inside, and I have a fan that draws air into that box, and then a vent that goes up into the sort of tank cabinet system. And yeah, the air is fairly. It's not super dry, but it's fairly dry. And if things are both for humidity and then also for cooling, I can basically cycle that into the tank and just flush all the air in the tank. And then I also actually have a portable air conditioner. So the whole system was designed with a little Arduino thing that I programmed myself and some humidity and temperature sensors. And there's a portable air conditioner, which the original plan was for that to blow into the humidity chamber and the cold air with the fog going into the growth chamber. But it just hasn't been necessary. Plants that I put in there are doing really well.
So it's fine with that too, and they'll then should settle down into relatively adverse conditions all time compared to then that will
I
happen.
wouldn't call them adverse.
Compared to say 10,000 feet on Mount Kinabalu and the 6,500 feet on Trismata, we probably can't quite replicate those conditions. So sorry, by adverse I meant not
No.
necessarily perfect.
Yeah, so I think it's always a balance of getting conditions so there's getting conditions perfect versus the cost of doing that and the effort of doing that. I've As I've done this for longer, I kind of lean more towards investing and putting in the effort and money to create the environment in the beginning, because it actually means less effort later, and it means that if you're investing in high value plants, you want them to survive. And yeah, so that's one side of things. But you also just see what works and you experiment a little bit. I think, there is a level of wiggle room and forgiveness. You don't have to have perfect conditions. I know of growers who monitor, using various online monitoring and systems. They try and directly replicate weather on these mountains. And I think that's a fun project if you enjoy that, but it's not necessary. I think a lot of the more tricky plants, the bigger challenge comes once they get to a larger size, and then you need a larger growth space that can accommodate them and have those cool conditions as a embassy. So we'll cross that hurdle when you get there.
We have the opposite problem. We have trouble getting plants to start growing to a reasonable size, and after that they take off and they're quite easy. But we don't have the space issues, of course, so we have growing indoors.
Yeah, and there's a robustness that comes with size. And I'm also of the sort of mentality that I like to grow my plants quite hard. You can grow plants under ideal conditions, but then the moment something fluctuates, they have a tantrum because all they've known is this perfect environment, where I like my plants a bit smaller, a little bit more stocky. If there's a couple of bad days or a temperature spike, they kind of just shrug it off because they haven't been too coddled.
I love the terminology. I can't imagine a Nepenthes Talk having a tantrum, but they do, don't they? Basically. And the lighting you're using on your indoor setup, LED lights, I presume?
So I have a mixture, also experimentation and just what was available at the time. So I have some LED panels. I have not gone the super fancy, expensive grow light route. Um, I Yeah, it just was cost prohibitive at the time, and I found that it hasn't really been necessary. Yeah, so you can get really good basic lights. You can have a look at their emission spectrums. You can look at how much light they're putting out. And actually, at the moment, I'm basically just using LED tubes. They're easy to replace. Yeah, and it's actually great.
We're doing an episode on lighting for growing plants indoors. It's part of our forthcoming series, and we have actually trialed LED lights from all sorts of different sources. I'm not talking about expensive grow lights either. The cheapest LED desk light, slightly more expensive ones from IKEA, the grow lights from IKEA, fluorescent tubes. You name it, we've tried it, and we'll be presenting that later. But our conclusion is that it doesn't seem to matter a great deal.
Yeah. I don't make forgiving. Yeah, I think, and it's probably I've said a couple of people say that, but I mean, when I started growing seeds, I did it in a tank, and just under normal fluorescent tubes, nothing fancy at all. As a student, now they have a slightly fancier, more complex setup, and I'm just using LED. Yeah, basically LED fluorescent tubes, and everything is thriving. I've got macrophylla in there, I've got the diabolica in there, I've got a whole lot of Pediampra in there, and they're happy. As long as the light intensity is right, the plants will grow.
Qualify what I said before I get a load of angry emails, but when I said we don't find there's much difference, I'm talking about where there is difference is the intensity. So if you're growing a lot of plants and you want a powerful light that you can mount 1 meter away from the glass, then it's got to be something very specialized. If you're just growing in a fish tank with an LED desk light over the top on a low budget, seems to be fine.
For sure. And I think that's definitely a good point. If you have a large grow space, you want a single high intensity light at distance, um, or if it's put it in off heats and you want to remove that heat from distance wise from the plants, you're going to need something different to if you're growing small seedlings. The low down lights. There's a huge amount of variety in terms of what you're trying to achieve.
I agree.
Um,
The heat generation is a big issue, say, in the laboratory where you have thousands or hundreds of lights. Sure. We grown plants very successfully for decades using this poor T5 heterobursting tube. Switching over to LEDs has actually produced imperceptible difference in the results, but there's a lot less heat generation, and of course, cheap
Yeah,
to.
and I say, and your electricity bill. So some grow lights I've also noticed is you can get these really fancy systems, but they cost a lot to run. And if as I said, a lot of my growing history has been as a student, or in the country where you can't always source the really fancy things without them becoming really expensive because everything has to be imported. You make do and you realize that, yeah, as long as you have the lights and the spectrum is right, and they're not heating up your plants, the plants are happy.
Okay, I'm going to ask you now the $64,000 question, which is, what is your favorite Nepenthes?
That is a tricky question.
Whatever you say, you're going to please some people and upset others.
So I have to pick one, or can I have like three?
Pick three. Come on.
Okay, so I really like Burbagei, or Burbagei, or however you pronounce it. I've heard different things. Macrophylla is actually a good one for me. I think, yeah, everyone's very excited about Edwardsiana, which I think is beautiful, and Velosa, which is also beautiful. But there's just, I don't know, I really like Macrophylla. I'm going with species here. So yeah, spots and stripes. Um, Sort of a nice Highland toothy one. And then I'm a huge fan of small dainty pictures that I feel everyone wants a lot of color or they want something big and toothy and flashy. But I like being able to look at something small and appreciate the details, kind of the minute details. And yeah, even something like Labrata, I think there's just such a
It was amazing to say that.
underrated species. It's like a little watercolor painting.
I think it's exquisite.
Yeah, it's completely amazing to just appreciate the subtleties. It doesn't have to be big and flashy. So yeah, I think I'll go with those three. It might be different in a week's time, but for now, yeah, I think those ones are the ones.
I didn't argue with you on any of that was true. It's very different. Cape Panera is different, and you stuck with the species there.
I think there's just so many hybrids. I think there's definitely some primary. I like some of the primary hybrids. I like obviously sort of hybrids that you can find in the wild in situ. There's something special about that puzzle.
Yes, now hybrids. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate horticultural hybrids and some of the more complex hybrids that are coming out. But I sometimes feel there's such good species with strong traits, and you start mixing them too much, you actually just water down those traits, especially if the parents are significantly different from each other. So yeah, some of the primary hybrids are great, and there's some really, really standout complex hybrids that are good too. But I'm a little bit of a purist, so we'll stick to the species.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm going to ask you before we wrap up, if there's one piece of advice you could give to a new amateur Nepenthes growing, as I might choose the word newbie, but a novice Nepenthes grower, what would you give? What would you say?
I think I would say try grow something you really like. I think often when new people get into the hobby, they get encouraged to buy, like Fintratas or things that are very easy and quick to grow. But personally, I think you either end up with a plant that is maybe exciting for a while, but there's so many nicer species and hybrids that are available. And really, especially with hybrids, a lot of the hybrids are really easy. So get something that you like looking at and that you are enthusiastic and it's going to keep you interested. And then also at some point space is gonna become a problem, and that can happen really quickly if you if you have a small space or if you're just enthusiastic, you have a tendency towards adding plants to the collection. And then suddenly you have these plants where you're trying to make space for other plants, and you're trying to get rid of this to bring this in. And I would say if there's a species or hybrid you really like, figure out how to grow it.
If you were to have a space issue, you basically would take, or when you do, you'll take hip passing and you'll cut the plant first. I mean, do you do that anyway to try and get more base shoots to make it more attractive? And also, when you cut the plant, what do you do with the tip?
Yeah, I don't spend a huge amount of time trimming that plants to make them look really neat or to encourage a huge amount of basils. They just the nature of being busy in life and working, and some plants not being where I live. Yeah, I tend to them when I can. It means I normally have to go in there with a little bit of a machete, and you learn over the years to get increasingly ruthless just by necessities.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really bad at throwing out plant material. So pitches are okay. When I start cutting vines and grow tips, I kind of have this need to propagate everything. So I tend to just put mass cuttings into some media in a pot, put them somewhere and forget about them for a while. And then, when I come back and they're growing and showing you growth, I tend to sell those off. It just helps pay for the hobby. I'm not a commercial grower by any means, but I know how hard it is sometimes to find material, or there's specific hybrids or plants that I brought in at some points and other people don't have. I like to share that, both in terms of seeing the community grow, and also sometimes accidents happen. And if I lose my plants, I want to know that I can get a cutting back at some point from someone. So I'm a huge advocate for sharing material, and yeah, having the collection of these pay for itself. But if there's something nice I want and I sell a couple of cuttings here, it kind of all balances out in the end. Yeah, that's my approach to it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Where we are here, we're in a nursery which has got vining plants everywhere. These are specifically being grown to flowers. We don't mind the vines, but personally, from an aesthetic point of view, I would cut a lot of these vines. But like you, I can't just put them in the bin.
Yeah.
Bala, who's standing nearby here somewhere, he looks after his nurseries. I think one of the techniques is to we cut the tip off the plant and just shove the tip back in the pot.
It's the same. I still like. I mean, I've done that once or twice.
Yeah.
I definitely think generally a nice rosette with a lot of lower pitches was more aesthetically appealing. I think some species, the upper pitches lose some of the appeal and not as colorful. And when you have a greenhouse with a bunch of vining Nepenthes, it gets very chaotic, very picky, and it can just look ugly, to be honest. When you have a huge tangle with a lot of old dead pitches and you have to try to get in there, in an ideal world, if I had more time, I would probably spend more time tending them, keeping them to a rosette state with more basils. I also sometimes let things fine because I want to get some flowers on them, and I'm not I think some people feel a compulsion to cross everything. I definitely don't feel that way. Yeah, there's a lot of flowers I just either leave them be, or I'll cut them off.
Yeah, yes. They've all been through that cycle. Only to start breeding the Nepenthes, whatever flower it is, was used. Now we're extremely selective. And you have to be because we're commercial as well. But we're commercial, that we love the plants. We're hobbyists, but foremost, really lovers of the plants. The commercial side of it is a necessity in order to allow us to be able to enjoy the plant.
And I've seen that with you walk into the greenhouses, being able to see your enjoyment of just being in the space, and, the excitement is still there. Yeah, that's really special. And I think that's why, it's the same reason I grow. And I think it's the same reason most people just we start off. And I think to hold on to that kind of wonder and excitement, appreciation for just how amazing the plants are is really special.
Yes, and I think it's very, very true. A lot of people that it's their escape. Stress sometimes to go and sit in the greenhouse amongst the plants, hot around the greenhouse for a bit, and enjoy their plants, or their Nepenthes or any other type of plant. For sure, something very cathartic about being amongst plants and enjoying it. I have to say, it's been an absolute pleasure having you visit. It was an unexpected pleasure. I didn't even know who you were. So we took a chance on having it. It's fairly unknown, and it's turned out to be a war joy having you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I really appreciate you having me and us here. yeah, it's just been really good to see the plants and the grow space and what you're able to do in the space that you have. And then also just on a personal level, it's been really pleasant getting to chat to get to know you a little bit better. And we're very grateful. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for giving us this
Sure.
E3.
Pleasure. Cheers.
So thank you everybody for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this. This is our very first podcast of this nature. We hope to do many more. Rather difficult to get visitors here, but perhaps we'll do some online chats and Nepenthes talks. And once again, appreciate you being here. See you again.